there you go. What it's like super.
Morning, Lily.
Good morning.
That didn't sound good.
No, it's good.
What?
It's okay.
What candle?
But then no one
Didn't balance.
Just put it in the laundry room and close the door, please.
just
Just put it in the laundry room and close the door. We're good. Thank you.
That's literally the type of video.
And sometimes they don't even pay for it. They just make the video and just post it online.
Yeah.
It's really weird. I would only do that if I got paid for doing it.
I've seen some interesting things on there, and then I've seen some kind of terrifying ones too. So.
Yeah.
And then you're doing that. Just reviews.
I've actually laid on a bed of nails. I did it at the
Have you?
at the McWayne Science Center.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Evenly distributed. Hey! How are you guys? Welcome back. It is. Sort of. Everybody have a good Thanksgiving?
I got new shoes.
Awesome. New shoes are great.
I got new sashos. They're the same pair, but
They're new.
Yeah, those are
Oh, a size bigger. Yeah. Very cool.
basically because my shoes are 9 because the 8.5 don't fit me anymore.
There you go.
I'm convinced I will have size 14 feet.
Oh my goodness. Your dad is 14?
yeah, man.
That's huge.
He's 6'4".
Oh, yeah.
And my
lovely.
dad and my mom is 5'4".
She's
Mhm.
5'2". How tall are you? You're 5'2". Right?
5'2.5". Yeah. A half is important. Sometimes I write 5'3" on things. All right, let me see what I have to turn in for you. I think you're either like 4'11" or 5 foot. You're getting close to me. Let me see what I have to hand back.
I'm either 5 or more than 2.
I don't know, something like that. Let's see. This is Lily, and she's not here. Lily, Sky. I don't see Sky yet. That one. That one.
I
Drew.
before I put these in, I had them out before I came to science. I had them out.
Sky.
Miss Danny, I
Post.
watched Red Notice. It is so good.
What is it?
Red Notice.
What's that?
It's this new movie with The Rock. It's on Netflix.
Oh, is it? It's good.
Yeah, it's like really good.
Cool.
It's about international art.
It's not here today.
I saw it pop up on Amazon Prime, and I was like, yeah.
Get my hand these back, and then we'll start.
Because apparently my mom thinks I need to be educated on these.
You know, crazy idea. It's you. Claire, I'm pretty sure this is you, even though there's no name. Oops. Who? Somehow. And one that one. Oh, check it out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, folks.
Now I got some.
So I'm glad y'all had a good break. Happy Thanksgiving. Awesome. I had a good Thanksgiving, except I was supposed to go to Virginia and I didn't get to go because we would have stayed with my in-laws and they all had COVID. So we did not get to go, which.
My dad came back from England
We got to do
before
that.
Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah?
He's not going to Dubai because the day he's leaving is 2 days away from when my Nana's coming, which is this Sunday.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
No, there's one in 1 week from now.
So anyway, today we are talking, so we talked evolution and natural selection right before break. And today we're talking about population evolution. So this is evolution within a species population instead of like individual organisms. So this kind of explains how you get speciation.
I misinterpreted it. And when it said evolution on the back of Rico, I'm just like, I know exactly what I'm doing.
I like it. It's cool. So population evolution. Let's see what we've got for today. So here's where, Drew, you with me? All right. So here's where we look at our evidence for population evolution. And we can talk about fossils for a bit. And we've talked about fossils before. So we can see evidence of evolution within fossils. So what's that? You guys know what that is?
That is,
Yeah.
I was about to say Sierra.
I think it's a triceratops.
Oh, Triceratops.
So what are fossils? Fossilized plants and animals can serve as evidence of evolution. Scientists use fossils to find similarities between ancient species and the ones that are alive today. Their location on Earth and how deep underground they are tell us a lot about how the species lived, how long ago it was alive. And we expect an ancestral species to share some traits with modern species. That makes sense, right? An ancestral species would have some traits of a modern species. So living things in the past are definitely different than living things today. Oh, wait, here comes Anthony. Let me let Anthony in. There he is. So yes, this little chickie says, yikes. So if you notice, do you see the way the hips are on this T-Rex?
What is that?
It's a little chick.
No, the thing that's like between
The T-Rex?
the legs.
Oh, that's just its pelvic bones. So
Dash.
here's the thing. So initially, there were some people who, when they found dinosaur skeletons, they assumed that because of the skull and maybe some impressions of skin and stuff that they found, they assumed that they looked a lot like modern day lizards. Hey, Sky. So if they look like modern day lizards, they expected that their hips and legs would be positioned like modern day lizards. So if you think about a modern day lizard, like a bearded dragon or maybe one of those skinks that you can see in your own yard, right? Think about that and think about the way their hips are positioned. Is this T-Rex, are his hips more like a lizard or more like a bird?
Lizard. Bird.
What do you think, guys?
I'm gonna say lizard.
More like a human.
So they're actually
Lizards are like this.
bird hips. Yeah, lizards' hips go out to the sides of their body. And so think about maybe like a Brachiosaurus or a Patasaurus or something like that. So if you tried to construct a dinosaur skeleton with their hips splayed like a lizard, their bellies, they would need a trench to walk because their bellies would drag the ground. So this was a clue that dinosaurs like this had bird hips. Can you see how similar his hips are to like a bird or a chicken? It's upright,
Even a human.
right? Or even, yeah, similar to a human. They stand upright. They don't spread out like a lizard. So there is some evidence that certain genetic lines of dinosaurs over time evolved into bird-like creatures and modern day birds, and some others evolved into like modern day alligators, for example, right? Other types of reptiles. So we can look at, oh, this thing's going to get in my way. So organisms develop in similar patterns. This is one thing we've noticed. So if you look here at patterns, these are embryos, right? So we have an embryo of a fish, an amphibian, a reptile, a bird, and a mammal. And if you watch how they develop over time, the pattern of development is very similar. And it's particularly in vertebrates. That's what we're talking about. So vertebrate development patterns are similar. And then if we look here, here's like a turtle, for example. And you can see where this turtle skeleton over time, turtle type organism, has become more similar to what we are familiar with now as a modern day turtle. That's right, very similar. Now, if you look here, we see down here, this guy versus this guy versus this guy. You can still see similarities in the structure of their bones. So look here, these bones that are highlighted in red are the homologous features between these organisms. So remember we talked about homologous and analogous a little bit?
And
Yeah.
I forgot to tell you on the quiz, my brother put in Charles Darwin, and then I put in Charles Darwin as well for the first question, but then his came up right and mine came up wrong. It said Charles Darwin, comma, Darwin was the correct answer.
Oh, it should have been either. It should have, I'll go back and, I look at them all.
I just spelled it wrong.
That's okay. That's why I put them in.
Right.
I try to put it in so that no matter what answer you put in, it's correct, but that's impossible because I can't guess everything you'll put in. So yeah, so you can see here that these vertebrae here, for example, these yellow one, they have a different function in these organisms, but it's the same set of bones over time. So if we look here, here's where we can really see some more examples. So the arrangement of bones shows how organisms may be related. So some features have similar internal structures, but serve a different purpose. So analogous versus homologous. So we've talked a little bit about this. So let's talk a little more. Here we've got analogous and homologous structures. So can somebody explain the difference between analogous and homologous structures? What do we think? What do you think?
That there's a layer of cartilage covering the analogous.
Sometimes. So here's an example. Analogous structures form this, have the same purpose basically. All right, so look down here at the bottom corner. We've got a bird, a bat, and a butterfly. They all have wings, correct? Okay, and these wings all serve the purpose of flying. But this bat, the structure inside its wing, right here, is very similar to the same structure of a whale fin, a cat foot, a human arm. The bones are the same bones, but they're arranged differently. And we'll refer to these, like if you are a veterinarian, you will refer to these bones with the same terminology that you would a human. So you would say, you know, a radius and an ulna, a cat's going to have the same bones, and a bat's going to have the same bones, even though they are positioned slightly differently. They may be shaped a little differently. They always go in the same order too. But this is an example, and this right here is another good example right here. If you look here, you can see even more bones than the original ones in that first image. So here's your human. Do you remember what this one is? Do you know what this bone's called? This is your humerus. People say it's humerus. It's your funny bone when you hit it. Ha, so funny, humerus. Ah. So,
I hate it.
yeah. So if you look here, here's a humerus in a human, a dog, a dolphin, and a bat. It's the same bone. And if you look back through ancestral lines, you can see how this bone will, over time, kind of switch, not switch position, but it'll switch function maybe. Yes.
It's a horse, not a dog.
Oh, a horse. You're right. Did I say dog? Jeez. Yeah, horse. And then, so here, for example, see these right down here? These down here, do you know what these are called? The bones in your fingers. We call them phalanges.
Phalanges.
Yep, that's a great name.
Sausages.
So the phalanges in your human fingers are down here in a horse. They're all the way down at the bottom, and they're here in a dolphin, and they're here in a bat. A human hand and a horse's leg do not serve the same function, right? But their structure is similar. A bat wing and a butterfly wing do serve the same function, but their structure is not similar. And it's because it did not evolve from a common ancestor. All of these came from a common ancestor. And these are also, what do a human, a horse, a dolphin, and a bat all have in common? They're vertebrates. What else are they? They're all mammals. That's right. They're all mammals. So you can really see the similarity in structure there. They're all mammals. Okay, so next we have some more images of that. Keep moving this around. So these are ancestral. This is an ancestral line of similar animals. So Equus, this is your modern day horse about 1 million years ago, right? And then we have all of these ancestors of a horse. And here is a horse's leg and a horse's skull. And can you see over time how maybe this set of bones evolved to this, to this, to this? Yeah. Over time, those things, as the need for, we always have to say, like we said last time, it's not that nature is actively choosing, right? Because nature doesn't have a mind and nature doesn't choose. But as the function becomes more defined, those that have a structure more suited to that function are likely to pass their genes on to the next generation. And then therefore, over time, your whole population starts to evolve a little differently. Yeah.
Is the one high, I'm not.
This one?
Try to say, is that like a dog?
No, it's a horse ancestor.
It looks like a meerkat.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Maybe like a guinea fowl.
60 million years ago.
I don't know. I'm a long time.
It is a long time ago. So fossils of the simplest organisms are found in the oldest rocks, and fossils of more complex organisms are found in the newest rocks. So this supports what Darwin was saying about evolution, which stated that simple life forms gradually evolve into more complex ones because rock layers are laid down over time, right? Now, next year, when we do earth science, if you're with us for earth science, we'll talk about how there are some forces within the earth that can shift those rock layers. And you can then see, yeah, well, and sometimes there's like uplifting and whatever, and you can see the lower layers and how they've developed.
Oh, yeah, I watched that Nat Geo thing, and the Earth's core started to pull apart in some places and created this huge crater.
It's pretty crazy. So by studying fossils, scientists learn how much or how little organisms have changed as life developed on Earth. There are gaps in the fossil record because many early forms of life were soft-bodied, which means they leave few traces behind. So when we're looking at phylogeny, which is like sort of your evolutionary tree of life, we find that invertebrates came first. So animals without any backbone. And prior to that, even non-chordates. Do you remember what I said about chordates and vertebrates? Who remembers? Do you remember that? How we classify animals as either chordates or non-chordates rather than vertebrates and invertebrates. That's because there are some animals that have a chordate. A chordate is an animal with a nerve cord, a central nerve cord, like from your brain, like your spinal cord, right? Your brain and spinal cord, you are a chordate, but your central nerve cord is protected within a bony spine. But there are certain organisms, specifically chondrichthyes, phylum chondrichthyes. So that would be sharks, skates, and rays. What's a shark skeleton made of?
Cartilage.
Cartilage. Yep, they have teeth that are hard, but the rest of their body is cartilage. So those animals are chordates. So we have to put them somewhere in that evolutionary phylogeny. So there are gaps because a lot of the early life forms were soft-bodied and they don't leave traces behind. And then we find similar structures such as backbones can be observed in different organisms. And whoop, what was the last thing? Whoop. Yeah, I know.
I'm convinced 1,000 years
Same-
from now, human beings won't have spines. They'll slither everywhere.
Will look like Wall-E. So the same structure in ancestral organisms can show evidence of change over time. All right, so related species. So this gets interesting. So there's several ways we can tell whether species are related. Some of it's comparative anatomy, which is what we were looking at before with homologous structures, right? We can look and we can say, okay, well, this animal is terrestrial, which means what? What does it mean to be a terrestrial? Not alien, that's true. It also means that it lives on land. Whereas this one is predominantly aquatic, which means it can come on land, but mostly lives where? Aquatic. In water. This one's fully aquatic.
That means it only
lives in the water.
I learned about an old
Right.
day in my writing. Also, how are aliens extraterrestrial? I mean, they spend a lot of time in the air.
Well, terrestrial means Earth.
Mhm.
So if you're extraterrestrial, you're not of Earth. That's why. Extra means outside of or beyond Earth. So here is a recent whale ancestor, and it has a pelvis and a hind limb. Whales have pelvic bones. Why? They don't have legs. If you took a blue whale, it couldn't walk on Earth, right? On the ground. It has no legs, but it has pelvic bones. It has pelvic bones because it evolved from a species that had pelvic bones, and it hasn't lost it. It's a vestigial structure. Do you remember what a vestigial structure is? It's something that you have that you no longer use. For example, in humans, the best known one would be your appendix. Anybody not have an appendix? I don't, mine's gone.
I definitely have.
Mine was taken out. So here again,
Two.
no, wasn't by choice. Sometimes appendixes get infected in humans and then it becomes a real issue. So if you look here again, there's more phylogeny with embryologic development. And here's another structure that we can compare. Let's look at hearts. How many chambers do you have in your heart? Do you know?
6, I think.
4. Humans have 4. Mammals in general have 4 chambered hearts. And so here's a human heart with 4. Here's a bird. Here's a reptile. Here's an amphibian. Here's a fish. So over time, you can see that more chambers, because this is the lowest on the phylogenetic tree, the highest on the phylogenetic tree. So we went from non-chordates to chordates that were not vertebrates, but fish predominantly. And then you evolve out from there to your fish, to your reptile, fish to amphibians, to reptiles, to birds, to mammals. Over time, that's how generally the line moved. Your first fish, by the way, they had cartilaginous skeletons like sharks do, but the first fish that we really consider the gap between modern day fish and completely cartilaginous creatures are these guys called aganathans. And aganathans had bony jaws, but cartilaginous bodies for the most part. But their jaws were bony. They're bony jawed fish. And modern day fish are osteichthyes. They're bony fish. Yeah, like sharks. So comparative genomics. Now here's where we get, here's where we can take a little of the subjectivity out. I mean, we can definitely do all kinds of measurements and do all sorts of math and with comparative embryology and comparative anatomy, and we can take a lot of subjectivity out. But when we get, do you know what subjectivity is? Subjectivity versus objectivity?
Subjectivity is about a subject?
Subjectivity is when your own opinion is a little bit involved. You know what I mean? And then there's objectivity, which means there's
Subjective, not objective.
yes, yeah, there's no objectivity would mean it's not at all an opinion. I could say, for example, it's a nice day outside. That's subjective. That's my opinion. If I said it's a sunny day, that's objective. It is sunny. Nobody can deny that. There's not a cloud. It is sunny, right? So subjective versus objective. So genomics are pretty objective. So researchers choose the appropriate time scale of evolutionary conservation for the question being addressed. So here's an example. Common features of different organisms, such as humans and fish, are often encoded with DNA evolutionarily conserved between them. So when we're talking about genomic conservation, that's a mouthful, what we're talking about is the DNA sequences that code for certain structures stay conserved over time. What do you think that means? What does it mean to conserve something?
Keep something like
Keep.
Wait, keep.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
That's your
So
key word.
Conserving a
Mhm.
mammal that is about to go extinct.
Yeah.
Is protecting it, so keeping
Right.
it safe.
Keeping it, yeah, basically keeping it unchanged. So when you're talking about conserved genomics, you're talking about, say there's DNA that codes for a particular type of structure. And that same structure is seen throughout many organisms. The DNA that codes for it is conserved from that first ancestor through that lineage to the more modern day ancestor. So we can see that same DNA in humans that we might see in fish, for example, and it'll code for the same things. So looking at closely related species such as humans and chimpanzees shows which genomic elements are unique to each. Genetic differences within one species, such as our own, can reveal variants in disease, for example. That's something that can be looked at. So here's a great example. Do you know what our closest genetic relative is specifically, genetically speaking? Like we share something like 96% of our DNA with a banana or something crazy like that.
Mushroom, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, our closest genetic relative is the bonobo chimpanzee. I mean, we are
I've seen apes.
really close.
Yeah, I've seen apes on National Geographic, like making stone tools.
Oh yeah, they
They're
do
gonna take
all
over
kinds
the
of,
world
right.
eventually.
So if you compare the genome of a bonobo to the genome of a human, you can see exactly where the differences are and exactly where the conservation is. So can somebody try and take that sentence I just made and maybe rephrase it so I'm sure you all understand it. So if you look at a bonobo, which is our closest genetic relative, and then you look at a human, and you look at the genomes of both, you can tell where the differences are and where the conservation is. So what do I mean by that?
Oh, Dan, we're someone who's a dog. That's just sad.
Oh, we are.
And a fruit fly?
So what would I mean about the conservation? We can see where the conservation is. So like, look right here. This is, I'll tell you what I mean, right here. All right. We have 100% protein similarity with chimpanzees. Means the proteins they produce are identical to ours 100% without exception. And look right here. Our genomic similarity to chimpanzees is 99.6. So we're talking about how much of a difference? What's the 0.4, Lewis, right? 0.4. That means everything else is conserved and that 0.4 is different. What you see, Darcy?
What if they take human DNA and infuse one of these things in it so it fills the missing 4%? It's gonna be smart. 0.4%.
Yeah, 0.4. So yeah, so you can see how similar we are to many, many other organisms. And if you look right here, for example, these roundworms, these are about as low on the phylogenetic tree as you can get. These are ancient, ancient organisms that have not changed for very long. I mean, they've been millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years in the same state they're in now. And still 68.2% similar genetically. So think about it for a minute here. The analysis of genomes enables us to study evolution at the molecular level. DNA evidence may indicate how two species are related to one another, even if their body structures don't offer enough clues. So here's some phylogenetic tree information and some genome information. Let's see if I can move these around again. I keep putting these in the way this week. I don't know why they're always in the way. So here, right here, these show, where's a good one for you guys? All right, right here at the bottom, the phylogenetic tree at the bottom. This is your phylogenetic tree of life. It shows some main branches here. You have bacteria, archaea, and then eukarya, right? And where would we be? Which group would we be in?
Eukarya.
Yeah, eukarya, right. There's even a little star. It says you are here, right? So we are going to be more closely related to these organisms than we are to these, and even more closely than we are to these. So the phylogenetic tree shows how closely related organisms are and how that change occurs over time. So speciation, this is a fun one. Speciation talks about how a species becomes separate and new from its ancestral species. So we know this happens because we can see it happen. Like this is something you can actually see occur in certain environments with certain species. So what's a species? First, we have to define a species. So are you blocking sun or do you have a question?
On the screen before this,
Yeah.
there were actually two red cardinals, a brown one and a red one.
Yeah, this one's a female
Yeah.
and this one's a male, right?
Yeah.
And this is a goldfinch and this is an oriole and this is a bluebird. Yep. So what's a species? All right. Now, a species is a group of living organisms consisting of similar individuals capable of exchanging genes or interbreeding. And here's the big one. When they mate, they produce fertile offspring. What does fertile offspring mean?
Like they give, like it's not an egg, like they give birth to it.
Okay, well, offspring is their, yes.
It means if they give birth to babies, that can make babies.
Yes, okay. It means that if two organisms mate, they give birth to a baby that can then make more babies. That's what fertile means. You can reproduce.
We're fertile organisms.
We are, because we're all the same species. Now, do you remember when we talked about mules?
Those are weird.
Now, remember we talked about how you can breed a horse to a donkey, right? Because they have the same number of chromosomes or close enough, things line up well enough, and you can produce a mule, but a mule cannot breed. It is not fertile.
Do they not have, like...
Okay, so the opposite of fertile would be sterile, and mules are sterile. They cannot reproduce. They don't have the ability. Because they were not produced from the same species. And all of this molecular stuff just doesn't line up correctly. They don't produce gametes. It just doesn't work. So although they have the body parts, it doesn't work.
The sad thing is I saw you humping them.
Oh my, that poor thing.
And the thing was...
Yeah, not gonna get anywhere. You're not getting anywhere, friend.
And the private part was like this big.
Oh yes, there. Mm-hmm. There's, yeah.
Stop.
So if you think about it, you can mate, we talked about this before, you could mate different kinds of dogs together and get new kinds of dogs. And they can produce, that's how you get Labradoodles and things, right? They're not a different species.
My grandpa has a Labrador German Shepherd.
Mm-hmm. So like even a Great Dane and a Chihuahua are the same species. They're a different variety of that species, a different, breed, but they are the same species. But a horse and a donkey are not the same species. They can produce a mule, but that mule is not fertile. So here's the big thing you need to remember. And this is one of these, remember I say every so often, commit to memory forever. This is a commit to memory forever. Species are capable of interbreeding and producing fertile offspring. That's a remember forever. If you're a member of the same species, if you can mate and produce babies, that can produce more babies. If your babies can't produce babies, and that's as a whole, there are obviously some humans that cannot reproduce for whatever reason, and some animals that can't. We're talking like in general on the whole. So the process is speciation. So what's speciation? It's forming you want me to go back for that, Darcy? Hang on, you're taking a picture. There you go. So there you go. So speciation, the process of speciation is the process of making a new species. So how do we make a new species? So, she's getting her picture. There you go. So, formation of a new species. So as a new species evolves, populations become reproductively isolated. And when members of two populations cannot interbreed, they produce fertile offspring. Reproductive isolation has occurred. Okay, here's what reproductive isolation is. All right. Say, okay, the river's over there, right? Y'all have seen a river back there, right? The river's over there. Yep. All right. And let's say there is a species of frog on this side. No, let's not say frogs because they swim. Species of, what doesn't swim well? Yeah. Cat. Cats don't like to swim. All right. There's a cat, species of cat, wild cat, living on this side of the river.
Which side is it?
And a species on that side of the river. And there are some trees that have fallen. Species on both sides, same species on both sides of the river. Okay, there's a tree that's fallen, they can walk across it, they can get together, they can interbreed. So the cat species spans both sides of the river. Suddenly there's some massive cataclysmic event, a canyon opens up. Yeah, canyon opens up, river gets spread hugely wide. Now you've got cats on that side and cats on this side, Gwinnett cats and Forsyth cats, and they can no longer mate. They can't mate anymore because they can't physically get together. They're too far apart. They are isolated. And we'll call this reproductively isolated because they cannot reproduce. They cannot mate because they can't physically get together. Well, evolution's going to, hang on. So over time, evolution occurs, right? Things are just changing. Over time, there are mutations within all of us all the time. Sooner or later, the Forsyth group of cats and the Gwinnett group of cats are going to have enough differences between them just because that's how things happen over time, that they can no longer interbreed if they were to be able to get back together. That's how you get species, reproductive isolation. So, yes.
I was going to say it was like that picture that you once showed us with a fox on that side, fox on that side, and it's like,
yep.
Do you really love me? And then he's like cross it over.
Same thing.
You don't love me that much.
So, what are other words for speciation? Biological evolution, convergence, parallel evolution, adaptive evolution. He likes the bread, I don't know. Evolution, organic evolution, phylogenesis. These are all. Hey, Junior Lab Rats, I apologize for your feed getting dropped. I think that was on Zoom's end, but I'm not positive. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick up right where we left off and make sure that we cover everything for you. So we were on this slide right here, and we were talking about how words like biological evolution, convergence, parallel evolution, adaptive evolution, evolution, organic evolution, and phylogenesis are all other words that basically mean speciation. So when populations become reproductively isolated, they can evolve into two separate species. Reproductive isolation can develop in a variety of ways, including behavioral isolation, geographic isolation, and temporal isolation. So I used some examples in class, and I talked about how geographic isolation, an example of that would be if there is some change in landforms or something that causes a population of the same species to be divided, how over time that can affect those groups and you end up with two different species. So I use the example of, say there was a breed of of wild cat that lived around here near my house, and they don't like to swim, but if a tree falls over the river, they can cross from Gwinnett to Forsyth. And you've got one unified population that crosses the river, interbreeds, produces offspring. And then there's a cataclysmic event and the river gets hugely deeper and way wider, and these two groups of cats can no longer get together. So you have your Forsyth cats and your Gwinnett cats, and they can no longer interbreed. Well, they've each taken their own segments of the gene pool with them when they were divided. So whatever genes are more prevalent in this gene pool versus this gene pool are going to become more prevalent within this population versus this population. And over time, as mutations naturally occur and natural selection does what it does, you can end up with two separate species of cats, your Forsyth cats and your Gwinnett cats, that can no longer interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Remember, producing fertile offspring is the important thing. Behavioral isolation would be, for example, let's say you have your two groups of cats and the Forsyth cats over time evolve to a point where the desired characteristic is green eyes, and they develop a mating behavior where the female Forsyth cats will only mate with the male cats with green eyes, and they sort of shrug off the brown-eyed males. Well, if you were to get these two groups back together, you could have a problem where maybe the Gwinnett cats all happen to have brown eyes because they haven't selected for it behaviorally. Then you also would have an issue there where your species could become separate because they would not interbreed. And then lastly, temporal isolation, that has to do with time. So that can have to do with what time of year species mate. Sometimes there's only one time of year where a certain species will mate. And if, similar species here and here mate at 2 different times, even if they were the same species, when they come together, that time frame is not going to line up for them. And so that's another way you can get speciation, or development of a new species from one ancestral species. So again, here they are. You have behavioral isolation, which occurs when 2 populations are capable of interbreeding, but have different courtship rituals or other types of behaviors. You can have geographic isolation, which occurs when 2 populations are separated by geographic barriers, like rivers, for example. And then lastly, temporal isolation occurs when 2 or more populations can interbreed, but they only reproduce at different times. And then you end up with speciation. Also notable, population is a group of individuals of the same species that can mate and produce offspring. This is one to commit to your brain forever and ever, fertile offspring. A gene pool consists of all the genes, including all the different alleles for each gene that are present in a population. So amongst all the cats within the population where they are all the same species, it's all the genes present in that gene pool. And if they get isolated from one another, certain genes are going to be more prevalent in one than in the other, because it's just the way the random sorting happens. So researchers study gene pools by examining relative frequency of an allele. The relative frequency of an allele is the number of times a particular allele occurs in a gene pool, compared with the number of times other alleles for the same gene occur. So for example, in this gene pool, it's your allele for green frogs that occurs most commonly, followed by your allele for purple frogs and your allele for red frogs. Now again, if your population gets separated kind of right down this line, and you get red only on one side of the river and purple on the same side, and the other side is all green, obviously that's going to change the prevalence of these alleles in the gene pool for each side of the river. Evolution is any change in relative frequency of alleles in a gene pool over time. So it's how often those alleles occur over time within all the genes available to that population. So natural selection operates on individuals, but the resulting changes in the allele frequency show up in populations. So it's populations rather than individuals that evolve. We see evolution in populations at large rather than in individuals. Individuals get the mutations, and natural selection will select whatever is most advantageous, and those individuals will pass their genes on, and then you'll see that change in the population over time due to the change in the gene pool. That's evolution of a species. So here is a great little video. This is the last thing I have, and it's a little strange, but hopefully remember what it's teaching you because it's a little strange.
The 5 fingers of evolution. A thorough understanding of biology requires a thorough understanding of the process of evolution. Most people are familiar with the process of natural selection. However, this is just one of 5 processes that can result in evolution. Before we discuss all 5 of these processes, we should define evolution. Evolution is simply change in the gene pool over time. But what is a gene pool? And for that matter, what is a gene? Before spending any more time on genetics, let us begin with a story. Imagine that a boat capsizes and 10 survivors swim to shore on a deserted island. They are never rescued, and they form a new population that exists for thousands of years. Strangely enough, 5 of the survivors have red hair. Red hair is created when a person inherits 2 copies of the red gene from their parents. If you only have 1 copy of the gene, you won't have red hair. To make this easier, we will assume that the 5 non-redheads are not carriers of the gene. The initial frequency of the red hair gene is therefore 50%, or 10 of 20 total genes. These genes are the gene pool. The 20 different genes are like cards in a deck that keep getting reshuffled with each new generation. Sex is simply a reshuffling of the genetic deck. The cards are reshuffled and passed to the next generation. The deck remains the same, 50% red. The genes are reshuffled and passed to the next generation. The gene pool remains the same, 50% red. Even though the population may grow in size over time, the frequency should stay at about 50%. If this frequency ever varies, then evolution has occurred. Evolution is simply change in the gene pool over time. Think about it in terms of the cards. If the frequency of the cards in the deck ever changes, evolution has occurred. There are 5 processes that can cause the frequency to change. To remember these processes, we will use the fingers on your hand, starting from the little finger and moving to the thumb. The little finger should remind you that the population can shrink. If the population shrinks, then chance can take over. For example, if only 4 individuals survive an epidemic, then their genes will represent the new gene pool. The next finger is the ring finger. This finger should remind you of mating because a ring represents a couple. If individuals choose a mate based on their appearance or location, the frequency may change. If red-headed individuals only mate with red-headed individuals, they could eventually form a new population. If no one ever mates with red-headed individuals, these genes could decrease. The next finger is the middle finger. The M in the middle finger should remind you of the M in the word mutation. If a new gene is added through mutation, it can affect the frequency. Imagine a gene mutation creates a new color of hair. This would obviously change the frequency in the gene pool. The pointer finger should remind you of movement. If new individuals flow into an area or immigrate, the frequency will change. If individuals flow out of an area or emigrate, then the frequency will change. In science, we refer to this movement as gene flow. All 4 of the processes represented by our fingers can cause evolution. Small population size, non-random mating, mutations, and gene flow. However, none of them lead to adaptation. Natural selection is the only process that creates organisms better adapted to their local environment. I use the thumb to remember this process. Nature votes thumbs up for adaptations that will do well in their environment and thumbs down to adaptations that will do poorly. The genes for individuals that are not adapted for their environment will gradually be replaced by those that are better adapted. Red hair is an example of one of these adaptations. Red hair is an advantage in the northern climates because the fair skin allowed ancestors to absorb more light and synthesize more vitamin D. Thumbs up. However, this was a disadvantage in the more southern climates where increased UV radiation led to cancer and decreased fertility. Thumbs down. Even the thumb itself is an adaptation formed through the process of natural selection. The evolution that we have described is referred to as microevolution because it refers to a small change. However, this form of evolution may eventually lead to macroevolution or speciation. Every organism on the planet shares ancestry with a single common ancestor. All living organisms on the planet are connected back in time through the process of evolution. Take a look at your own hand. It's an engineering masterpiece that was created by the 5 processes I just described over millions and millions of years. Can you recall the 5 main causes of evolution from memory? If you can't, hit rewind and watch that part again. But if you can, give yourself or your neighbor a big 5-fingered high five.
So that's our lesson. Sorry, some of it wasn't live. Start studying for your midterms now. Don't wait. And we will go over them next week in class. We'll go over some studying together as a group, but you're going to want to get a jump on it for sure. And hope to see everybody next week. Thanks.